Hey everybody, this is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I hope that you are having a wonderful day. Now, the first thing I need to do is say whoopsie. Yep, whoopsie. Mainly because I thought that the next book was The Hounds, and I was wrong. It wasn't. There's actually a few collections between. And so what I'm going to do is make a series. Yes, much like whenever it came out. It was published in July, then August, etc. in the late 1800s. So we'll do this as a series. This will be part 1 of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And in this one, we're going to go over the first 6 books, or chapters, booklets, that came out. The first one was A Scandal in Bohemia, which was released July of 1891. And then in August of 1891 was The Redheaded League. The next one is A Case of Identity, which came out in September of 1891. Then in October of 1891 was The Boscombe Valley Mystery, which brings us to The Five Orange Pips, which in succession would be November of 1891. And then finally The Man with a Twisted Lip, which came out in December of 1891. Now, being that I've read 2 of the Sherlock things before this, being A Case of the... No, it was The Sign of the Four, and then before that, A Study in Scarlet. I've already kind of started to put my judging goggles on for this Sherlock character and for Watson. And I kind of feel like Watson wasn't a fairly wrote character. I really do. Because there's these times whenever he's narrating that he has these incredible insights about things that are happening around him, people's behaviors, their strengths, their weaknesses. But then you're sitting next to Sherlock, and he's like that poor teenage kid that is so angst up because they're sitting next to the other teenage kid that they're interested in, and they can't talk, they can't think, they can't reason. So I kind of felt like it was unfair to Watson the way that he's been wrote. But that doesn't mean that he's not a livable character or a lovable character. I could certainly see as things progress that he will become more full-rounded and not just a transport for the story to begin, for the story to start to be told, and then for Sherlock to get into his shenanigans, and then for Watson to wrap it up into a nice, neat little bundle. Let's get to the first publication that came out, which again was entitled A Scandal in Bohemia. Now, this one I really enjoyed, and I liked it so much, and there's a reason for that. Not that I am a Sherlock hater, I'm not, but he does have a very dismissive way whenever it comes to other people, and in the first 2 books, there was a couple comments about women that were like, nah, whatever, and and it was a dance, and he did not win. He lost. Absolutely loved it. And it was so much of the ending was the reason why I liked it. This is the first time that whenever I got done reading a Sherlock, I was like, hey, there might be something to this. It was well done. So the storyline, of course, has the same formulation of how we start, but the King of Bohemia has had a issue because in his younger years before, he ended up meeting up with this opera singer, and she was in a bit of an adventurer like himself. Apparently she was quite beautiful, and her name was Irene Adler. So him and Irene, they hook up, and apparently there's possibly some discretions that had occurred, and now she is holding this picture as blackmail against the king because he's getting ready to get married, and she said that on the day that he publicly announces things, then she's going to release this picture. Kind of sounds familiar in today, doesn't it? But the long of the short of it all is he had her luggage redirected while she was traveling. He had hired and used some of his best people to ransack her places that she lived in to try to find this picture. And they had not been successful. So as a last resort, he goes to Sherlock and gives them pretty much run of the roost, gives them all kinds of money in notes and in gold, And he's like, anything you can do, just make it go away, right? So Sherlock and Watson, they get together, and Sherlock devises a plan, keeps Watson in the dark, much like a mushroom as usual, until they're actually there to execute his set plan. And this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So they execute the plan, and the picture location is actually revealed to Sherlock. But he does that dismissive thing that I mentioned earlier about, she's a woman. She won't be up until after 8 o'clock, and, we'll just get the king and go over there before she's out of her bed, and then we'll have our picture. And the king will have it right there in his hand. It'll be awesome. That's a big paraphrase, by the way. They go to execute their plan, and her room is in disarray. It looks like it's been ransacked. And Sherlock goes to where it was hidden, and indeed pulls out a picture, but not the one that he had seen in the day before. And this is the good part. This is the really good part. Because that picture was just a picture of Irene Adler, not of Irene Adler and the king. Now, here's what happens at this point. Sherlock marks this up as a loss. He's like, oh no, I've been had. And rightfully so, because there's this nice detailed letter that she had wrote for the king, and she addresses Sherlock in it as well, saying, you almost got me. But as the smoke was literally clearing, I figured you out, sir, because I as well have been in the arts, and I know what is what. But anyway, long and the short, she didn't rat the king out because she had fallen in love too with somebody else that actually did care for her in a proper way, and they were moving out of the country. And her last words were pretty well, you leave me alone, and I won't make this picture surface. So the king marks it up as a win, which puts Sherlock kind of back into that funk. It was Irene that made this little publication so much more interesting to me, because finally we have a dynamic character. Somebody that's not bad, not good. She's just dynamically ranged, where she has her own things that she wants to do. She adds a little bit of flavor, and she wins. And Sherlock lost. Now, it's not that win and loss thing that I enjoyed so much. It was that Sherlock was outwitted, and he learned a very important lesson. Now, on to the second publication, The Redheaded League. This one I enjoyed for particular non-biased reasons, you know? A little bit of red hair here, a little bit of red up here. That happens. But the premises was, again, one of those it's offbeat. It's a little bit different. And would it have made a fantastic large book? Probably not so much. There wasn't such a dance in this one. The long of it all is, of course, this little publication starts out with a person looking for Sherlock and Watson. And whenever he finds them, he's not necessarily up in a Twitter and aggravated or anything like that, but he is dismayed that this nice little job that he had has suddenly disappeared. So then he's like, this is most interesting, but I kind of got to give you the backstory. So let's transport to that backstory. Don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I think it's Jabez Wilson was the guy that was looking for Sherlock and Watson. So his story was essentially, he's a pawnbroker, and he was looking for some help. He found some help, by the way, for half wages, which is quite a phenomenal thing. Can't really do that these days. He gets this guy working with him, and his guy brings him a nice little advertisement, which was, if you've got red hair, you can join the League of Redheaded Gentlemen. We'll pay you £200 and £4 a week. And in that ploy, essentially there are two people working in cohorts together to fool old Jabez because his location is remarkably close to a bank. Yes. So essentially, there is a nemesis of Sherlock Holmes that, after a couple of descriptions, he figures out that this is a person he's had run-ins with before. They set a trap. Jabez, Jeeves. I'm just going to call him Jeeves. So Jeeves comes to Sherlock and Watson, and he describes to him this fanciful tale of hiring a individual to work in his little pawn brokerage for half wages. And that gentleman had brought a advertisement to Jeeves, and in it said, if you've got red hair, then you can have this job. Not just anybody with red hair. No. You have to be a very particular type. There's this interview process that you go through that you will read about, and that was actually kind of comical. Now, his helper, of course, agreed that while Jeeves was off writing these little things from an encyclopedia, that he would manage the pawn shop while he was gone. And just like myself, whenever Sherlock heard all the little particulars, he was like, well, Mr. Wilson here, you really haven't been wronged by these people that are running the league. You did get paid. You did get your money. You did provide your services for them, and they seem to be gone. But I think that there might be something else going on here. Let's have a look, shall we? And so they go to his house, and he meets the guy and realizes it is somebody that he's had some dealings with before, but he keeps that to himself. And then he kind of meanders around and finds that his house is really close to a bank, speaks to a police chief, etc. And then they set a trap to catch the two people that were digging a tunnel from the pawn shop to the bank to get the gold bullion. I think it was in francs, that they had a excess amount that they usually wouldn't. So he springs the trap. Watson's with him, and of course Watson falls over Sherlock like a smitten teenage adolescent over another one on, wow, you're so smart, you're so intelligent, stroking his ego like a peacock should be. And that's the end of that one. Which moves us into the third one, right? A Case of Identity. That one was, yes, September. And this one shows mankind's kind of darker side. It was a little bit more serious than the other two in the series, and kind of made me feel really bad, quite frankly. Whenever I read it, it felt a little bit dirty in a way. The young lady, Mary Sutherland, it was all because of a plot against her from her stepfather. See, quite apparently, her dad had a very successful business, and he passed away, and then her mom remarried somebody that was just a little bit older than her, and she had a little bit of an inheritance, and she was letting them have that inheritance while she was living there so she wouldn't be a burden to them, which is good on Mary. But where the problem lies is the new stepdad. He decides that he needs her to stay at the house, to never leave, because he just wants that constant income. Regardless of what the successful business is doing, he just wants her money. And quite apparently, him and her mother scam against her, because that's what the case of the mistaking identity was all about. There was a lot of little details in this, which were good details. I would encourage you guys to read this one and A Scandal in Bohemia, and the reason why is because they're so different from each other. One is kind of a lighthearted, bouncing dance, and the other one is more of a criminal mind person. Now, granted, it's not a very deeply involved story, but essentially Mary's feelings get completely wrecked because her stepdad ends up dressing up as somebody else, and they only meet in low light, and he disguises himself, his voice, wears tinted glasses, and only will write to her on a typewriter so that she wouldn't figure out it was him. And the poor Mary here is absolutely heartbroken over the situation, and rightfully so, because on her wedding day she gets stood up, and essentially her stepdad showed up dressed as her love interest that she was having Sherlock investigate, and then absolutely just disappeared by stepping out the other side of the carriage, undressing from that character, and becoming himself. He wanted to scar Mary and make her never want to get married again so that he could keep the money. Now, moving right on. It brings us to the October publication, which was the Boscombe Valley Mystery. And if you've read Pendergast, this will seem familiar. Makes me wonder if maybe two authors might have took part of this as a homage to Sherlock and to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Anyway, there's this young lad, which apparently is quick to be tempered, and he ends up getting in trouble because everybody's accusing him of killing his dad. Apparently they were having an argument, and it was out in a forested bog type area. See what I mean? And the last time he's seen, he's screaming at his father, and his father's screaming back, and it looks like they're getting ready to fight. Next scene, dad's dead. Kid doesn't have his gun anymore, and the gun is found next to his dad, and the dad was killed with a blunt force, not with an actual bullet. And so there's this one. It was completely different because this one was wrapped up in the details of the actual crime, and of Sherlock doing some major pontifications about his character, because there was one point I remember that he was talking about the son, and the son, he described other people describing of the son, if you follow, as he is both clever and dim-witted. So they were giving him too much credit for one thing to be able to say this about the other, which was what actually sparked Sherlock's interest in that case to begin with, in my opinion, beyond the person showing up and going, hey, help. And eventually actually gets the son cleared and leaves the past of the family in the past so that the son that was in trouble and the daughter that went looking for help wouldn't have to carry those burdens on with them of the past of their family. Yep, convoluted, but if you read it, you'll see what I'm talking about. And that one was actually interesting in a different way than the other two that I mentioned you should probably check out, simply because it wasn't so much being mean and cruel, or it wasn't so much a lighthearted dance. Moreover, this was almost forensical for the 1800s, and that was kind of cool. Now we have the 5 Orange Pips. That one was in November. This story I didn't much care for. I know that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was using these books as a method to introduce people that hadn't heard of particular things, such as maybe the Mormons or this, that, and the other, to those things, and kind of shed proper light upon them in his mindset. The whole reason why I didn't like it is it's a very taboo thing to talk about, and it's something that really shouldn't be talked about because, well, it's garbage. The whole premises of this little publication has to do with a family that had stolen a bunch of documents and articles from said organization. I don't even think I'm going to name them, because I don't even want them to have that kind of a entry. So this bad organization, which is pretty well filled with a bunch of bigots and people that hate people just because of differences of origin or where you come from, or if you happen to be not just like them, a society that thinks that they are supreme and are clearly not. They should read a little bit of Nietzsche to find out just exactly how not special they are. So this family ends up stealing some of the documents from them, and the uncle of this kid that becomes the main person in the book, he gets a letter with their emblem on it, and inside of it is 5 orange pips. Now, what the orange pips have to do with, it's really never explained, really. But it does make for an interesting end of the story. And within a short period of time, he tells this young kid. So this kid's name is John, and his uncle received that letter that had the pips in it, and then 2 months later he dies. And it almost looks like a natural kind of a death. Well, at least it's proclaimed that way, in that he drowned in water in the basement, I believe. So his inheritance goes to, since he's the uncle, to John's dad. And then his dad gets the same letter. And then just a few weeks later, his dad passes away. And then he inherits the place. And then he gets the letter. And it's really getting spooked and afraid, and rightfully so, if something like this was happening. So Sherlock is like, hey, look, best thing you can do, since you told us that that book was burned, and all the stuff that was in it was burned, then you got that one page that really doesn't have anything on it. Just go put it where they told you to and leave a note with it saying, hey, it's gone. It was burned by 2 owners back, and there's nothing I can really do about that. And that poor kid, John, gets killed. Again, in another way that looks accidental. Same as his father, same as his uncle. And they pretty well got away with it. But Sherlock did send a letter that had his initials instead, and 5 orange pips to them, to where the people will be next, to hopefully scare them. I really felt like that was a weakly ended story. I didn't much care for that one at all. And that brings us to the last one that we're going to talk about today, which is the one that was in December of 1891, The Man with a Twisted Lip. Now this one doesn't open the same. This one, Watson isn't being so Watson-y, if I can use that way. And a friend of his wife shows up, really upset because her husband is missing. He usually only goes out for maybe a day at a maximum, maybe a day and a half, for example, but then he always shows back up. And she knows what opium den that he likes to go to, which is on the other side of the city. So it is decided that Watson will indeed be the one that goes after said guy. And whenever he gets to this opium den, he does find him, and he gets him outside, gets him in the hansom, and sends him on home, but Watson stays at the opium den. Why? Well, he had actually found Sherlock there, and as he was walking by this little old craggly guy sitting at the bar stool, he feels a pull on him, and Sherlock's like, hey, psst, don't give me up, meet me outside. Give me 5 minutes. Paraphrase, but that's kind of what happened. So Sherlock explains that the whole reason why he was there is it's a pretty good source for information, because people just murmur on about everything, and they don't really worry about it. So he has to disguise himself so that the proprietor of the place doesn't figure out that he is who he is. Otherwise, bad things would probably come to him. Now, the next point is that Watson has sent his friend home, and that's pretty well the end of that part, which caused me some confusion because whenever I read it the first time, I missed it. And I figured it out later. But essentially, there's this other character, this other guy, which is Neville St. Clair. And Neville St. Clair, his wife, has contacted Sherlock. And she was walking by said opium den after doing some shopping, and to her surprise, saw her husband on the balcony. He made a little peep, jumped back into the window like he was pulled backwards, and therein lays the start of the story. Really. Now, this is one that was a little bit different, and it shows that some things just never change. So, Neville is he's a businessman. And he's a proper businessman. And so it really surprised his wife that she would find him there, one. And then is that he was absolutely missing. See, he was supposed to bring a toy home to his kid. A bunch of blocks. Well, Sherlock walks Watson through all of his explanation of where he's gotten it to. And eventually ends up at the jail where the little old beggar in that room where her husband was. Well, I skipped that, didn't I? So while she is explaining things to Sherlock, she has told Sherlock how whenever she saw him, she went up the stairs into the room, and there was a little bit of blood on the window, but there wasn't her husband. It was just a little old beggar. Her husband is still missing. Sherlock's still trying to find out where he is, and he pretty well thinks that her husband is dead because his clothes with everything in them were found next to the river, and the beggar was arrested. Now, there was blood on the window, and as she was talking to Sherlock about this letter that she got from her husband after he was missing, it was one of those moments where she said, yes, he had, and this was not a direct relation in the story. There was no reason for her to give up this information or for it to be in there, except for maybe some trying to give the audience a clue. And it was that her husband had cut his finger. Well, the little beggar had said that he had cut his finger the same day, and that's where that blood on the window had come from. So that kind of lined it up for me whenever I read about her husband and her connection to him, and then also the beggar with the bloody finger. So then the next scene happens. Yes, we're at the prison, and Sherlock has got a big sponge for a sponge bath. He's going to wash down this dirty old beggar before he gets sent to prison. Come to find out, it's Neville, which was kind of the cool twist towards the end. He found out a while back that if he just sat down and put out a cap and didn't do anything, he could make a lot of money. Well, anyway, Neville had figured out that he could make all that kind of money, and it weighed on him for a while, and eventually he started taking these business trips. And in these business trips, he would just set out, do nothing, make a bunch of money. But he found a way not to get arrested, which was clever, and that was that he would give little wax figures to people that gave him money. So that was at least a way for him to fill out his time. And it was an interesting little booklet publication that came out in December of 1891. Now, we've got those done. If you've made it this far, thank you. Now, if you happen to be new to the family, make sure you don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell, because without both, it doesn't really let you know when the next video comes out. And make sure that you click that like and share, please. It does do something for the channel. Beyond that, if you happen to find a good book in between now and the next video, make sure you tell me about it. And after I finish this epic read that I put myself on, then we'll read it together. Now, it's time for me to get down that road. You guys have a great weekend. Be safe, and I will see you in the next video.